Well, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 0 to 60. This one's been a long time coming. This is my N54, and if you're one of the new 8-speed followers to the channel, for the last 5 years, or 5 years prior, this was mainly what the content was based on around the channel. It was playing around with these engines, seeing how fast we can make them, see what we can sort of get out of them on a budget, and I like to do things on a budget, or at least sensibly. I've definitely spent a lot of money figuring out what works and what doesn't work over the last 5 years. And anyway, this is my personal car. I owned, or we, I should say, the channel owned quite a number of N54s over the last few years. A few different chassis, a few different motor setups, different turbo setups, everything. This is my personal one. This is the one that's sort of got a soft spot in my heart that I can never let go, regardless of costs. And yeah, this is the one we're going to play with for the next few months. Now, a bit of a backstory on this engine and what you're seeing here. This is the JMC single turbo kit. The engine went into the vehicle, I think mid-2021, around October 2021 maybe, and it was a replacement for the original engine that was in that car that actually cracked a piston. So I cracked a factory piston, I think it was around 630 horsepower, 640 wheel horsepower, basically running 27 pounds of boost on the Chinese 17T turbos. They are incredible bang for buck, and probably the most fun I've had with the car was bolting those turbos on relatively little amount of mods, running that mid 20 pounds of boost. It was just a fun, good little setup with a 6 HP. Going just past that is where everything gets really expensive, and that's where we're at now. So yeah, the motor went in around October 2021 it was. There is a video series on it, which I might put some links to in the description if you want to go back and see the full story. But yeah, I bought a second-hand vehicle. It was the most economical way to get the engine. Pulled the engine out, and even though it was a very low kilometer motor, it didn't have compression on cylinder 4 from memory. Now, it wasn't an issue with the bottom end. It was actually valves. So I did a leak down test, and you could hear all of the compression escaping out of the exhaust valve. I didn't want to call it quits, so I pulled the head off and I reseated every single valve. Painfully, I learnt how to reseat valves back then. It was a good time. But I do remember about 12 or 16 hours, some incredible amount of time to reseat all the valves manually. I did it manually for some reason. Learning, I guess. Anyway, we put the head on. At the time, I ordered a OE replacement head gasket from FCP Euro. It was about half the price of the genuine BMW item. It was worded like it was supposed to be an OE supplier for BMW. But it wasn't. It is the L-ring head gasket. Now, these gaskets, they've got a bit of a name for themselves in the N54 world in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's because they don't hold cylinder pressure very well. Yeah, I gave this engine a proper beating for a long time. It ran that 630, 650 wheel horsepower for well over 12 months. With the China turbos that were on it, it seemed absolutely fine. I was confident enough to use one of these L-ring head gaskets on another motor that I built. That was the first built motor that we did on the channel. And I was kind of confident that the L-ring was okay. Turns out they're okay at around 630 wheel horsepower. The second you go over that, they like to spit the coolant out. And within, I think, 2 weeks of each other, this motor lost its coolant, and the other motor that I put together lost its coolant. Both of them did it at around 30 pounds of boost. This engine was running a G35 1050 at the time, so a fairly significant turbo, and 30 PSI is, I don't know how much power. It must have been kissing well over 700 horsepower. And yeah, L-ring did not want to hold up. So we're going to open it up today, see how bad that gasket did let go. And I'm going to share my plans for the future. Yeah, this is going to be probably my last figuring it out build. I've got another engine build in the works for my car, which will probably get done mid next year. The plan with that motor is just to tried and true method. Don't worry about the costs. We're going to sleeve it. We're going to close the deck. We're going to ARP it. We're going to do everything the best way currently available to us. However, I still want to experiment a little bit with a more budget-friendly built motor. So yeah, I can't remember if I mentioned it yet, but this is going to have the King Tech pistons. Now, I did do a video on the King Tech pistons when I bought them back in 2022. I'll put a link to that. Basically, they're a Chinese manufacturer of pistons and rods. I feel like they're doing quite a number of different pistons and rods for a large range of engines. I also kind of feel that when you see a small performance shop come out with their own brand of rods or pistons, they're probably getting them through Kintec and putting their name on them. Hopefully they're going to be okay. I've seen quite a few people purchase them since I did run them with no issues. We'll see what happens. Fairly confident the bottom end is going to be reasonably stout. My goal with this is to get around that 800 wheel horsepower. So we're going to see if we're going to do it. Now, where it's going to get a little bit different to what most other people do, I'm not going to put ARP head studs in it. Obviously, we've got an issue with cylinder heads clamping and keeping that cylinder pressure in. I do genuinely believe that the L-ring head gasket does not have the holding capacity or ability that the factory BMW MLS has. However, there is a significant issue with engines around the 800 wheel horsepower figure where the cylinder walls start moving around, and I think that is the cause of why most of them do what this one's done, even when you've got ARPs. Obviously, to do head studs is quite a significant investment. To do it properly, you really need to time cert the block. Clamping those, that's not right. Screwing ARPs straight into the aluminium block, even when you get the correct ARP part number, there was a bit of an issue with 4 or 5 years ago, people using Chrysler 300C studs in these, I think it was. Long story short, they weren't getting the full amount of thread engagement into the block that they should have been getting. So that lack of thread engagement, and it was about 4 or 5 mil missing, that lack of thread engagement, a stud that's got no flex in it, people were pulling head studs, fairly common. However, I've known people with built bottom ends, proper ARPs that have got full engagement, even with time-certed blocks, where around the 800 horsepower, they still have issues with spitting the coolant out. That's good gaskets, doing everything by the book, 800 horsepower, cylinder walls, we believe, start to get a bit wobbly, and there goes your coolant. So, what I wanted to try and do with this is try and find a solution to get it around the 800 wheel horsepower and not lose the coolant, and I'll show you what I've come up with shortly. But just keep that in mind. I reckon the issue that most people encounter are the cylinder walls walking around, and yeah, obviously if the cylinder walls are moving, they're gonna lose the seal that they have against the head gasket, and the coolant's going to get hit with all the compression. All right, so this is the engine. I'm gonna switch you over to time lapse. I'll get the head off. We'll see how bad this one has leaked. It spat the coolant out maybe 2 or 3 times, only for a fraction of a second, obviously. Yeah, we'll see how bad it is and make sure we haven't damaged anything. Okay, so I think the head is ready to come off. I did have access to some torque wrenches, so I thought it'd be interesting to measure the torque that was required to break all of the head bolts loose in case there was an issue with the way they were torqued initially, not just the L-ring. The 4 smaller 9mm head bolts, they were all 60 to 70 Newton meters to break them loose. All of the main head bolts were around 120 to 130 Newton meters to break them loose. So it's unlikely that there was an issue with the head bolt torquing that's resulted in the gasket not sealing. So let's take this off, see what it looks like. The old N54 head is bloody heavy. Oh, come on, come on. There it is. Drip oil all over the toolbox. Looks like a head gasket. Let's bring you guys over. All right, so, I mean, it all looks okay. There's nothing torched on this side of the gasket. Although, so you can see these gaskets, they have this like rubber coating, which is to help clean the, which is to help seal the coolant. It's gone from here. It has gone. So I dare say that is where all the combustion escaped and made its way into the coolant jackets. Pistons all look good. Nothing alarming about the pistons. Let's have a quick look at the head before we lift the gasket up. Head also looks pretty good. The cylinder 5 looks oily. Cylinder 6, where it had the... Oh. Cylinder 6, where it's blown through here. That's that section here. And you can see there, so I never resurfaced this head, Did it all the old-fashioned way, by hand. And you can see there are some scratches there, but it's not, you can't feel them. That's interesting. I wonder if not servicing the head has helped cause this gasket failure, instead of just pointing and blaming L-ring. Like, everything looks okay. Cylinder 5 is definitely more oily. I'm not sure what this stuff is. Something on that exhaust valve. Scratches off there. I don't know what that is. It almost looks like mold. If anyone knows what that is, let me know. You can see it built up on most of them, but it is particularly bad on cylinder 3. I wonder what it is. So when I reseated all these valves, all the valves got cleaned to perfection. So they all kind of looked brand new. Did it with a brass wheel, as did all of the combustion chambers were all cleaned as well. This looked really clean when it went back together. But, I don't know what that is. That valve, it wipes off, whatever it is. I wonder if it's built up from the 2 years it's been parked up. Anyway, we got that. Let's pull this head gasket off, and we'll see what underneath looks like. Oh, she's stuck. Oh, stuck down there. Bottom of the gasket. It looks warped in that corner. And you can see there's a section just, again, cylinder 6. It's blown through that sealant. So I'm guessing that's what the issue is. This sealant on the L-ring is not standing up to the task. Interesting, it's let go on cylinder 6. Okay, I'm going to have a proper look at this and I'll share my thoughts shortly. Okay, let's have a quick look at everything. I can't see any failures with the surfaces on the block or the head. I've had a bit of a wipe down. Everything feels really nice. There is that little bit of point of concern here, which you can actually see. It's almost like a Scotch pad. I can't remember doing that, but it's just this area here. It's not actually on the sealing point where it seals the compression in there, or combustion, I should say. And that is around this area here. This all feels really good. All the metal parts are good. The only thing that looks weird is the L-ring head gasket, where this black stuff, the sealant that they put onto the gasket, is just gone. And you can scrape it off. I don't know what it is. I've never really had issues with this stuff failing on a genuine head gasket. Maybe it's normal that it does this, but yeah, both sides. And it's very hard to use anything scientific along what I'm about to say, but yeah, when you lay the gasket down, the area at the back is particularly warped. I mean, it's had coolant run through it, which means it would have gotten really hot, but yeah. L-ring head gasket. A lot of people, like at least one other person I know of, had an issue where it failed. That particular motor that I'm referencing was, I'm really sorry, his name's John, but he had a full built closed deck, time certed ARP head bolts, head studs I should say. L-ring gasket failed immediately at 30 pounds of boost again. He put a stock all he did was pull the head off, stock gasket on, sent it, and the engine lived on forever. So he definitely found a weak point with the L-ring. I think I've just run into it as well. It's around that 700 wheel horsepower. So moving forwards. So what are we going to do? I want to get this engine to, reliable is not the right word, but I want to make it so it can handle around 800 wheel horsepower and not be blowing head gaskets. I want it to keep the coolant where the coolant's supposed to be. And I want to do it without spending another 5 or 6 grand on top of the parts that I've already bought for this. So here's my train of thought. Now, speaking to Ken from Wedge Performance, his engine, which had the proper ARP kit for this, and it was time certed, he had an issue where his cylinder walls start walking around that 800 wheel horsepower. And it's kind of, it makes sense to me. When you get to 800 wheel horsepower, it's only a 3 litre. These cylinder walls, they've only got to move a fraction of a mil, and that's it, the combustion's coming out. So I get it. I get that these really need to be reinforced some way, ideally. Now, there has been a lot of talk of epoxy filling the block. Now, this is something that guys, particularly in the Honda world, have done, and I get mixed results. I want it to work. I've spoken to as many people as I can about it. Baytech from Scotland, with his K24 running 1,000 horsepower, he has an epoxy-filled block in his, with a caveat. And yeah, asking around, trying to work out if it's something I wanted to try on this or investigate, I've decided not to, for two reasons. Oh, I do want to give a shout out to, I think the gentleman's name's Payton. He actually offered me an epoxy kit to try, but there's quite a few people that are trying it. And when I started talking to people that have pushed similar capacity engines, open deck engines, well past 1,000 horsepower, I kind of feel like it might not be the solution that I want. Basically, yeah, I kind of get the opinion that if you get to the point where the cylinder walls are moving, it's going to push through the epoxy. The epoxy, I know it's supposed to be rock hard, and it should be some sort of support system for the cylinders, but it's not as hard as metal. It's just not. And anyone that's touched anything epoxy, it goes rock hard, but you put it in a vise, it doesn't act like metal, not normally. Now, I'm not saying that's the case with the ones that people are using in the engines, but that's my personal take on it, and I understand that it might not be as solid as metal. Now, I did have a chat to a gentleman, Dave Asprey. He had I can't remember now exactly, he had a 3.8 or a 4 litre open deck Nissan engine and going through the same issues, and he wanted to investigate the epoxy route. He added the epoxy to the block, and he hit exactly or near enough the same horsepower limit before the head gasket went again. That was an engine with ARPs. It's a 4 litre, making around 850 wheel horsepower from memory. He was using pump and methanol, not ethanol, so cylinder temperatures could be a bit higher, cylinder pressures might be a bit higher to make that power. There's a lot that goes into it. It is hard to be scientific about this sort of thing, but yeah, his personal opinion, and he's built a lot of engines, a lot of 1,500 plus horsepower engines. His personal opinion, the epoxy's not the best way to go about it. He actually said to me the O-rings that people put when they seal a cylinder, like proper race engines, where they cut a groove into the top of the cylinder head, that is actually, or likely, more effective at keeping the cylinder wall where it should be, keeping the head gasket seal intact, than epoxy filling. And that made sense to me. And going back to Baytech in Scotland with the K24 that made the best part of 1,000 horsepower, he did have an epoxy filled block, but he also had cut rings into the block as well. So he had sort of two solutions to help keep the cylinder there. And I wanted to try a cut ring style head gasket, which I have here. We'll open it in a few seconds. It's in that blue box. In fact, let's open it now. Let's open it now. Let's use my table. So, cut ring. This one's actually a Supertech branded one, but the gasket says Athena, so I guess Athena's making them. It is a older style, it's a composite fiber gasket. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, it's not an MLS gasket. It's an old style gasket, obviously used to seal all the water jackets and oil jackets. And then the combustion is done with these rings. Now these rings are, I don't want to open it yet until I'm ready to use it, but they look like they're probably 2.5, 3 mil thick. And you might be able to see, hopefully you can, but they're not flat. There are teeth on them. You can hear my nail going over them. So there's 3 or 4 teeth in those. And the idea is they bite down into the cylinder wall surface, and they also bite into the head. So I'm hoping that using these with the factory head bolts, that's going to clamp in there and help keep it sealed. So yeah, this is my current train of thought, and I'm open to discussion in the comments if anyone wants to disagree or someone's already tried this, but I'm kind of hoping that this style of gasket that's got the cut rings to help seal the cylinder pressure, it's got the old style fiber gasket to keep all the coolant and the oil where it's supposed to be, might help us push around that 800 wheel horsepower number. I do know of, I can't remember the dude's name, I think it was Justin Valentine, N54 Gasm, I think his name is. Interesting dude. Credit where it's due, he got his engine really moving, his car really moving. He must have been pushing 800 wheel. He did a 60 to 130 and an E90 full weight, I believe, in the 4s. 4 seconds, 60 to 130, that's fast. And yeah, that's a serious amount of power. Keeping that in mind as well, he did not have ARPs. He was using a 12 mil head bolt conversion. Don't know where I got that idea from. And also keeping in mind that a standard unopened engine seems pretty happy around 7 to 750 wheel horsepower in the head gasket seal. That's when you'll break a piston or bend a rod, but an unopened engine, factory head bolts, they seem to be okay around 750. So that's what I'm gonna shoot for. Basically, factory head bolts, upgraded pistons and rods, a slightly better seal around the cylinder wall, hopefully a seal that's gonna keep the cylinder wall hard up against the head. These teeth in these rings should bite into the head and bite into the cylinder wall, and basically help reduce the chance of that cylinder wall moving, which is when everything goes to tits. So I'm keen to see if it's going to work. I'm interested to see if it's going to work with factory head bolts, not using ARPs, which is what these would normally be used with. I am aware of people don't think these are great when you're over that 1,000 horsepower for a 3 to 4 litre engine. There's plenty of people that have RBs, 2Js that have tried them, basically said they didn't get good results. They're going back to an MLS. But I want to use this cut ring to try and keep the cylinder wall in place. It's not just about keeping the cylinder pressure there, it's about keeping the cylinder wall still. Let's see if we can make 800. Guys, let me know your thoughts. That's where I want to go. I know a lot of you were very interested in the epoxy. I'll be honest, there's probably 30 people that have tried epoxy filling one of these blocks this year. Hopefully someone's going to push past that 800 horsepower. Yeah, for the N54 nerds, let's just also keep in mind that 700 to 750 wheel horsepower with a single is a lot nicer on your rods and pistons than with small twin turbos. Keeps the heat out of it and also makes the power higher up in the rev range, so you're not putting the force on the rods at lower RPMs, which means there's force on the rods for longer. Keep that in mind as well. There's heaps. I've had 2 years to think about this, and this is something I want to experiment with. Hopefully you guys are interested in seeing the results, and if this doesn't work, we're going all out next time. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, next motor, I want canned, I want everything. But for now, we'll see if we get a semi-budget option. To give you an idea on what this is going to cost, assuming you don't need to buy tools, $500 to $600 for the head gasket. Pistons and rods are 2 to 3 grand, depending on exchange rates and freight and that sort of stuff. I've got ACL bearings that I'm going to use for the rod bearings. Then it's just your normal gaskets, that sort of stuff. This is the sort of thing you should be able to put together for 5,000 to 7,000 Australian dollars. If you're in America, just divide that by about 40, and that should be what it costs you guys. Not a huge amount of money, but a lot of maybes here. But we like maybes. We like to work things out. Let's see if these head gaskets are any good for this sub 1,000 horsepower level. Guys, thank you for watching. Comments below. I want to hear your thoughts about what I'm doing. Yeah. Catch you on the next one.